The moment a badge is forced to salute the truth, power finally remembers who it serves. Every officer inside the station froze as the command echoed through the hallway. Hands that had confidently fastened handcuffs only minutes earlier now rose in perfect military salute. Radios fell silent. Conversations disappeared. Even the hum of fluorescent lights seemed louder than anyone's breathing. At the center of the room stood a tall black man in a simple navy jacket, his silver hair neatly trimmed, his expression calm, his posture unwavering. He didn't return the stares. He didn't raise his voice. He simply waited, as if he had seen moments like this before. 15 minutes earlier, nothing about Lieutenant General Marcus Ellison suggested that history was quietly walking through the streets of Arlington, Virginia. There was no dress uniform covered in ribbons. No convoy. No security detail. Only a weathered leather folder tucked beneath one arm, and the steady pace of a man who believed respect never needed an audience. The cool autumn breeze carried fallen maple leaves across the sidewalk, while commuters hurried toward coffee shops and office buildings. Marcus glanced at his watch. 9:23. He still had enough time to meet Sergeant William Harper, an 82-year-old Korean War veteran waiting across town, to receive a long-overdue military commendation. Marcus had insisted on delivering it personally. Some honors, he believed, should never arrive in the mail. As he crossed the street, he noticed a young mother struggling with a stroller near a broken curb. Without hesitation, he stepped forward, gently lifted the front wheels over the concrete edge, nodded with a warm smile, and continued walking before she could even finish thanking him. There was nothing dramatic about the gesture. That was simply who he had always been. Quiet service had shaped his life long before stars decorated his shoulders. 2 blocks away, Officer Ryan Callahan leaned against his patrol cruiser, sipping coffee while watching traffic crawl through the morning rush. 8 years on the force had convinced him he could read people within seconds. Confidence had slowly become certainty, and certainty had become something far more dangerous. His partner, Officer Derek Collins, finished typing notes into the patrol computer before glancing toward the intersection. "Busy morning," Derek muttered. Ryan shrugged. "Busy means opportunities." His eyes settled on Marcus walking calmly along the sidewalk. A plain jacket, military haircut, heavy folder, confident stride. Ryan narrowed his eyes. "See him?" Derek looked up. "The older gentleman?" Ryan nodded slowly. "Something feels off." There was no evidence. No report. No emergency call. Only instinct wrapped in assumption. Marcus continued toward the Veterans Memorial, completely unaware that curious eyes had already begun constructing a story about him. The city moved normally around him. Office workers laughed outside cafes. School buses rolled through green lights. Flags fluttered above government buildings beneath a cloudless sky. It should have remained an ordinary Thursday. Instead, a single decision quietly redirected the course of everyone's day. Ryan opened the cruiser door and stepped onto the sidewalk. "Sir," he called firmly. Marcus stopped immediately and turned with the calm attentiveness of someone accustomed to listening before speaking. "Good morning, officer," he replied. His voice carried neither fear nor irritation, only courtesy. Ryan approached, studying him from head to toe. "Mind telling me where you're headed?" Marcus smiled politely. "To meet an old soldier who has waited many years for something he earned." Ryan glanced at the leather folder. "Mind if I ask what's inside?" Marcus looked down briefly before answering. "Personal documents." The answer was truthful. It was also incomplete. Ryan folded his arms. Around them, pedestrians slowed just enough to notice another routine police stop. No one imagined they were witnessing the first moments of a story that would soon reach the highest levels of the United States Department of Defense. Marcus met the officer's eyes without challenge, without resentment, almost as though he hoped this conversation would end with simple understanding. Instead, somewhere hundreds of miles away inside the Pentagon, an operations schedule quietly counted down toward a meeting that could not begin without one man. And no one in that station, not Ryan, not Derek, not a single supervisor preparing paperwork inside, had any idea that America was only minutes away from searching for one of its most respected generals. Ryan Callahan held Marcus Ellison's identification card between 2 fingers for several long seconds without saying a word. The card looked ordinary enough, a government-issued credential with clean edges and understated design, but it did not immediately answer the question Ryan believed mattered most. In his mind, confidence without explanation was always suspicious. Marcus stood patiently with his hands visible, his leather folder resting comfortably beneath one arm, showing no sign of frustration despite the growing attention from people walking past. A businessman slowed his pace while pretending to check his phone. A pair of college students glanced over from a nearby coffee shop patio. An elderly couple waiting for the crosswalk signal exchanged uncertain looks before continuing on their way. Arlington had witnessed countless routine police encounters over the years, and to everyone watching, this appeared to be just another one. Ryan finally looked up. "You said you were meeting a veteran." Marcus nodded once. "Yes." "Name?" "Sergeant William Harper." Ryan typed the name into the patrol computer while Derek Collins quietly observed the conversation from the passenger side of the cruiser. No immediate records appeared that connected the meeting to any active police report. Derek lowered his voice. "Everything seems normal." Ryan barely acknowledged him. His attention remained fixed on Marcus. "What exactly is in the folder?" Marcus answered with the same calm tone he had used from the beginning. "Documents that belong to the United States Army and a commendation intended for someone who earned it many decades ago." Ryan tilted his head slightly. "If everything is legitimate, then you will not mind showing me." Marcus paused, not because he feared the request, but because he carefully measured every response before speaking. "Officer, those documents are not mine to display on a public sidewalk." Ryan folded his arms tighter across his chest. To him, the answer sounded rehearsed. To Marcus, it was simply the truth. Years of military leadership had taught him that trust was protected through discipline, even during uncomfortable moments. He had spent an entire career safeguarding information that never belonged in curious hands. He had led soldiers through impossible circumstances, briefed presidents, comforted military families after unimaginable loss, and stood beside young recruits on the proudest days of their lives. Compared to those responsibilities, waiting patiently on an Arlington sidewalk required very little effort. The silence stretched several more seconds. Derek shifted uneasily before stepping closer. "Sir, do you have another form of identification?" Marcus reached slowly into his jacket pocket and produced his driver's license without hesitation. Derek compared the name carefully. Marcus Ellison. The address matched. Everything appeared valid. "Looks good to me," Derek said quietly. Ryan did not respond. Something about Marcus's composure continued to bother him. Most people became nervous during prolonged questioning. Some grew defensive. Others talked too much. Marcus did neither. He simply stood with quiet dignity, answering each question directly while never volunteering more than necessary. Ryan interpreted the calmness as calculated. He had forgotten that genuine confidence often speaks more softly than arrogance. Across town, Sergeant William Harper checked the time for the third time in less than 5 minutes. He sat outside the Arlington Veterans Community Center wearing his oldest service cap, carefully brushing invisible dust from its brim with trembling fingers. Volunteers had decorated a small meeting room with American flags and framed photographs from different generations of military service. Fresh coffee filled the air, while a folded Army flag rested beside an unopened presentation case waiting on the front table. William smiled to himself. General Ellison had insisted on making the trip personally, despite a schedule that everyone knew was impossibly demanding. That alone had meant more to William than any medal could. Back on the sidewalk, Marcus glanced briefly toward his watch. The ceremony was supposed to begin in less than 30 minutes. He silently hoped the elderly veteran would not think he had forgotten. Before Marcus could speak again, Ryan reached for the leather folder. Marcus instinctively stepped back one careful pace, not in defiance, but to protect documents entrusted to his care. The movement was small, respectful, almost imperceptible, yet Ryan immediately interpreted it as resistance. Around them, the atmosphere shifted. Conversations faded. Curious faces lingered longer. Somewhere inside the Pentagon, a secure conference room slowly filled with senior officers preparing for a classified briefing scheduled to begin precisely at 10 o'clock. An empty chair waited at the head of the table beneath the seal of the Department of Defense. No one there seemed concerned yet. General Marcus Ellison had never been late a single day in more than 3 decades of service. Ryan Callahan made his decision before anyone else had the opportunity to to slow the moment down. In his experience, hesitation invited uncertainty, and uncertainty weakened authority. He reached for his radio and calmly requested that another unit stand by nearby. The response came back within seconds, routine and uneventful, as though nothing unusual was happening on that quiet Arlington sidewalk. Marcus Ellison watched the exchange without changing his expression. He had spent decades observing people under pressure, and he knew that the loudest assumptions often came from the smallest pieces of information. He also knew that arguing rarely changed a mind already committed to its own conclusion. Instead, he spoke with the same measured courtesy that had defined every conversation since the stop began. "Officer, there is a veteran waiting for me less than 2 miles from here. He has waited more than 60 years to receive recognition that should have arrived long ago. I would appreciate the opportunity to continue." Ryan looked directly at him. "That depends on whether everything checks out." Marcus answered softly. "Then I hope it does." Derek Collins shifted uncomfortably beside the patrol vehicle. The exchange felt increasingly unnecessary. Every identification presented had been valid. Marcus had answered every question without hesitation. Nothing about his behavior suggested urgency, aggression, or deception. Derek quietly leaned toward Ryan. "We have no report connecting him to anything." Ryan lowered his voice. "Something is not adding up." Derek glanced back toward Marcus. "Or maybe everything is exactly what it looks like." Ryan ignored the comment. He requested another database search using Marcus Ellison's full legal name. The computer processed thousands of records before displaying a restricted government notification that required additional federal authorization. Instead of interpreting the restriction as evidence of high-level clearance, Ryan viewed it as another unanswered question. He frowned at the screen. Why would basic information be restricted? Marcus answered before Derek could speak. "Because not every public servant works in a public office." Ryan looked up sharply. "That is not much of an explanation." Marcus smiled politely. "It is the only explanation I am authorized to give." The words were calm, respectful, and completely sincere, yet they only deepened Ryan's suspicion. Around them, more pedestrians slowed their pace. Some watched openly while others pretended not to notice. A delivery driver paused beside his truck. A woman walking her golden retriever quietly crossed the street to avoid the gathering crowd. Nobody expected the morning to become memorable, yet everyone sensed they were witnessing something they would later describe to friends and family. Less than 2 miles away, Sergeant William Harper remained seated inside the Veterans Community Center. Volunteers had begun arranging chairs for guests while a local high school choir quietly rehearsed patriotic songs in another room. William smiled every time someone mentioned General Ellison. "He keeps every promise," the old veteran said proudly. "If he said he is coming, he will be here." His confidence was absolute. Across the Potomac River, inside a secure conference suite at the Pentagon, several senior officers reviewed briefing folders while waiting for the final participant to arrive. Lieutenant General Marcus Ellison was scheduled to lead the morning discussion concerning a nationwide military readiness initiative involving multiple commands across the country. The digital clock on the wall changed from 9:34 to 9:35. Colonel Nathan Brooks checked his phone, expecting to see a routine message explaining a traffic delay. Nothing appeared. He tried calling Marcus directly. The call went unanswered. That had never happened before. Brooks frowned but remained calm. General Ellison had earned a reputation for precision that bordered on legendary. During 34 years of service, he had never missed a classified briefing without advance notice. A second officer attempted the same call. Again, there was no answer. Back in Arlington, Ryan stepped away from Marcus and quietly spoke with his supervising sergeant over the radio. The conversation lasted less than a minute, ending with a simple instruction to continue investigating until every question had been resolved. Ryan returned with renewed confidence, convinced that patience would eventually expose whatever he believed Marcus was hiding. Marcus listened carefully before taking one slow breath. He looked toward the clear blue sky for just a brief moment, then back at the officers standing before him. There was no anger in his eyes, only quiet disappointment that valuable time continued slipping away from a veteran who deserved better. Hundreds of miles of military communication networks were already beginning to search for the one man who still stood peacefully on an ordinary city sidewalk. while those surrounding him remained completely unaware that the silence before them was only the calm that comes before an unexpected reckoning. Marcus Ellison slowly lowered his wristwatch beneath the cuff of his jacket and looked back at Ryan Callahan with the same quiet composure that had never left him since the first question. He understood that every additional minute placed Sergeant William Harper further from the ceremony he had anticipated for decades, yet frustration would not change the outcome. Throughout his military career, Marcus had learned that character was tested most clearly when circumstances felt unfair. He believed dignity was not measured by how people behaved when respected, but by how they responded when misunderstood. Ryan glanced toward the patrol cruiser as another officer arrived and parked along the curb. Officer Melissa Grant stepped out, greeted Derek Collins with a brief nod, then approached the group with professional curiosity. "What do we have?" she asked. Ryan answered confidently. "Government identification that cannot be verified through our normal system, restricted records, and incomplete explanations." Melissa studied Marcus for a moment before speaking directly to him. "Sir, have the officers explained why they are keeping you here?" Marcus nodded politely. "They have explained their concerns. I have answered every question they have asked." Melissa noticed his calm tone and the absence of any agitation. "Have you refused to cooperate?" Marcus offered a gentle smile. "No, officer. I have simply protected documents that are not mine to display publicly." Derek quietly added, "His driver's license checks out. There are no warrants, no alerts, no complaints." Ryan folded his arms. "But there are still unanswered questions." Marcus replied without hesitation. "Questions alone do not always mean wrongdoing." For a brief moment, nobody spoke. The sounds of passing traffic filled the silence while a city bus stopped across the street to pick up morning commuters. Several passengers looked through the windows toward the gathering before the bus continued along its route. Nearby, someone lifted a phone and quietly began recording from a respectful distance. Marcus noticed, but said nothing. Public attention had never interested him. Recognition had always belonged to the people he served rather than to himself. Ryan looked once more at the leather folder. "Sir, I am asking one final time. Will you voluntarily allow us to inspect those documents?" Marcus answered carefully. "Officer, those materials contain official military information entrusted to my care. I cannot surrender that responsibility without proper authority." Ryan interpreted the response as another refusal. Marcus intended it only as an explanation. The difference between those two perspectives quietly widened the distance between them. Less than 2 miles away, volunteers inside the Veterans Community Center exchanged uncertain looks. The ceremony had been scheduled to begin in 15 minutes. Sergeant William Harper remained optimistic despite the delay. "General Ellison has never forgotten a soldier," he said warmly. "If he is late, then something truly unexpected must have happened." His words reflected decades of trust built through countless acts of integrity that few people outside the military had ever witnessed. At the Pentagon, Colonel Nathan Brooks placed another unsuccessful call before walking quickly toward the office of Major General Rebecca Lawson. She looked up immediately when she saw the concern on his face. "Still nothing?" Brooks shook his head. No answer to his secure phone. No answer to his secondary phone either. Lawson frowned. "Contact his driver." Brooks already had. The assigned driver reported that General Ellison had declined transportation that morning because he planned to make a personal stop before the briefing. That detail immediately changed the atmosphere. General Ellison rarely adjusted his schedule unless the reason carried deep personal meaning. Lawson looked toward the conference room where senior leaders continued waiting. "Find him," she said quietly. Now, back in Arlington, Ryan reached a conclusion that Derek wished he would reconsider. "Sir," Ryan said firmly, "until we can verify everything, we are going to ask you to come with us to the station so we can continue this conversation there." Marcus met his eyes with steady calm. There was no trace of resentment in his voice when he answered. "Officer, I do not wish to delay your work, and I certainly do not wish to create a misunderstanding. I will cooperate peacefully." Derek let out a nearly silent breath, hoping the matter would be resolved quickly once supervisors reviewed the facts. Marcus carefully lifted the leather folder with both hands before saying, "Please handle these documents with care. They belong to the United States Army, and more importantly, they represent promises made to people who serve this country with honor." Ryan accepted the folder without appreciating the weight carried inside it. To him, it appeared to be nothing more than paperwork. To Marcus, it contained decades of sacrifice waiting to be acknowledged. As the patrol vehicle pulled away from the curb toward the station, the empty chair inside the Pentagon conference room remained untouched, and the invisible countdown toward a discovery that would astonish everyone involved continued ticking one quiet minute at a time. The ride to the station passed in complete silence except for the ordinary sounds of morning traffic moving through Arlington. Marcus Ellison sat quietly in the back seat, looking through the window as familiar streets slipped by one block at a time. He recognized the Veterans Memorial in the distance, then the church where military families often gathered before deployment ceremonies, and finally the intersection that would have taken him directly to Sergeant William Harper. For the first time that morning, he allowed himself a small measure of disappointment. William had waited more than 6 decades to hear his nation's gratitude spoken aloud, and now every passing minute made that long overdue moment drift farther away. Still, Marcus refused to let frustration replace compassion. He knew that people often acted from incomplete information rather than deliberate malice, and he hoped this misunderstanding would end before it created consequences that reached beyond a single traffic stop. Ryan Callahan remained convinced he had made the correct decision. From the driver's seat, he replayed the conversation in his mind, focusing on every answer that seemed carefully measured, every document protected from public view, every restricted record that refused to open inside the patrol computer. Experience had taught him that unusual situations deserved additional scrutiny. What experience had not yet taught him was that extraordinary responsibility sometimes looked remarkably ordinary from the outside. Derek Collins glanced into the rearview mirror several times before finally speaking. "Sir, is there anyone we can call for you while we sort this out?" Marcus answered with the same calm voice that had never risen above ordinary conversation. "Thank you for asking, officer. There are people who will eventually notice I have not arrived where I am expected. I believe they will make the necessary calls soon enough." Ryan responded before Derek could continue. "If everything is legitimate, then this will be resolved quickly." Marcus simply nodded. "I sincerely hope so. Not for my sake, but for others waiting on me today." Those words lingered in the vehicle longer than anyone expected. Across town, volunteers quietly delayed the ceremony by another 15 minutes. Sergeant William Harper remained seated in the front row, his neatly pressed jacket displaying medals earned many years earlier. A young volunteer apologized for the delay and offered another cup of coffee. William smiled kindly. "No need to worry. General Ellison has spent his entire life taking care of soldiers. If he is delayed today, someone else probably needed him first." The room grew quiet after hearing those words because everyone present believed them without question. At the Pentagon, however, quiet confidence had begun turning into professional concern. Colonel Nathan Brooks stood inside the communications center while technicians attempted to locate General Ellison through approved government channels. His secure mobile device remained inactive. His scheduled driver confirmed that the general had chosen to walk part of the morning route after making a personal stop. Security personnel reviewed nearby cameras, transportation records, and routine travel patterns. Yet none of the information explained why one of the country's most respected senior officers had disappeared from a schedule that never tolerated unexplained absences. Major General Rebecca Lawson entered the room carrying a classified briefing folder that was supposed to be sitting in Marcus Ellison's hands. She looked directly at Brooks. "Has anyone contacted Arlington authorities to determine whether there has been an accident or medical emergency?" Brooks answered immediately. "Not yet, General. We wanted to eliminate routine possibilities first." Lawson checked the wall clock. 10 o'clock was now less than 20 minutes away. "Begin making those calls." Back at the station, the patrol vehicle rolled into the secured parking area before Ryan stepped out and opened the rear door. Marcus exited without hesitation, carefully straightened his jacket, and glanced toward the leather folder still resting in Ryan's hands. "Please remember the commendation inside is for Sergeant William Harper," Marcus said quietly. "He earned it many years before either of us began our careers." Ryan acknowledged the statement with a brief nod, but remained focused on procedure. Inside the building, the morning routine continued uninterrupted. Dispatchers answered calls. Detectives reviewed reports. Officers exchanged greetings over fresh coffee. No one paid particular attention to the quietly dressed gentleman entering beside two patrol officers. To everyone inside, he appeared to be another citizen waiting for questions to be answered. Marcus walked through the hallway with steady dignity, greeting each employee who happened to meet his eyes with a polite smile. Several returned the gesture without knowing why his calm presence felt strangely reassuring. At that exact moment, hundreds of miles of secure communication networks continued expanding their search, and one unanswered telephone call was about to become the single most important question inside the United States Department of Defense. Marcus Ellison was escorted into a quiet interview room furnished with nothing more than a simple table for chairs and a wall clock whose steady ticking seemed louder with every passing second. He placed his hands calmly on the tabletop and looked toward the window and the door, where officers occasionally passed without giving him a second glance. There was no frustration in his expression, only the quiet patience of a man who had spent an entire lifetime understanding that the truth sometimes arrived later than assumptions. Ryan Callahan entered carrying a notepad, while Derek Collins followed with 2 cups of coffee. Without saying a word, Derek placed 1 cup in front of Marcus. "Thank you," Marcus said warmly. "That is very thoughtful." Derek offered a polite nod before taking his seat. Ryan remained standing. "We are still trying to determine exactly who you are and why your information is restricted." Marcus looked directly at him. "Officer, my name is Marcus Ellison. That has never changed. My responsibilities are what require protection, not my identity." Ryan opened the leather folder carefully, expecting to discover something that would finally answer his questions. Instead, he found a beautifully prepared military commendation enclosed inside a protective case, several sealed government envelopes marked for official delivery, and a handwritten letter resting neatly beneath them. The letter caught his attention first. It was addressed to Sergeant William Harper in elegant script. Ryan glanced at the opening lines without reading further. They spoke of gratitude, sacrifice, and promises fulfilled after many years. Nothing about the contents resembled criminal activity or deception. Derek quietly examined the commendation. "This looks authentic." Marcus answered gently. "It is authentic. Sergeant Harper earned that recognition decades ago. Administrative mistakes delayed it for far too long. Today was meant to correct that mistake." Ryan carefully set the documents back into the folder. For the first time that morning, uncertainty replaced some of his earlier confidence. Nothing before him matched the suspicion he had built in his own mind. Even so, he believed procedure required every unanswered question to be resolved before anyone could leave. Marcus noticed the hesitation and spoke with remarkable kindness. "Officer, experience has taught me something important. Sometimes good people make difficult decisions using incomplete information. What matters most is what they choose after the missing facts appear." Ryan did not answer. The words settled quietly into the room. They sounded less like criticism and more like wisdom earned through many years of responsibility. Across the city, Sergeant William Harper finally stood from his chair and walked slowly toward the front window of the Veterans Community Center. The parking lot remained nearly empty except for volunteers greeting arriving guests. William looked down the road one more time before smiling softly to himself. "He is coming," he whispered. "He always keeps his word." Those nearby admired the confidence in his voice without realizing that the promise was being delayed by circumstances neither man could have imagined. Inside the Pentagon, the atmosphere had changed dramatically. Major General Rebecca Lawson stood before a large digital operations display while communication officers reported every unsuccessful attempt to contact Marcus Ellison. Secure devices remained silent. Scheduled check-in procedures had been missed. His absence from a classified briefing was no longer viewed as an inconvenience. It had become an immediate priority. Colonel Nathan Brooks entered carrying a printed travel itinerary. "General Ellison planned to stop in Arlington before coming here," he reported. Lawson looked up immediately. "Then Arlington is where we begin." She turned toward another officer. "Contact local law enforcement agencies. Quietly. I want to know whether anyone has interacted with him this morning." Within minutes, secure telephone lines connected military officials with regional communication centers. Requests were professional, respectful, and direct. They did not accuse anyone of wrongdoing. They simply asked a question that would soon change everything. Had anyone encountered Lieutenant General Marcus Ellison during the morning hours? Back inside the interview room, Marcus glanced once more at the wall clock. The ceremony for Sergeant Harper had already begun without him. That disappointment weighed more heavily on his heart than his own situation ever could. He closed his eyes briefly, hoping the elderly veteran would understand that broken promises were never intentional. Outside the room, a dispatcher answered an incoming call routed from another agency. The expression on her face changed almost immediately. She looked toward the supervisor's office, stood from her chair, and quietly said, "Sergeant, I believe you should take this call yourself." The hallway suddenly felt just a little quieter, as though the building itself sensed that an ordinary morning was about to become unforgettable. The station supervisor accepted the transferred call with the relaxed confidence of someone expecting another routine administrative question. Arlington Police Department, Sergeant Thomas Reynolds speaking. The voice on the other end was calm, measured, and unmistakably official. "Sergeant Reynolds, this is Colonel Nathan Brooks with the United States Department of Defense. I need to verify whether your department has had any contact this morning with Lieutenant General Marcus Ellison." Reynolds hesitated only briefly before answering. "May I ask why you are looking for him?" There was a short pause before the colonel responded. "Because Lieutenant General Ellison is scheduled to lead a classified briefing involving senior defense leadership, and he has never failed to report for duty without notice during his entire career. Every approved method of contacting him has been unsuccessful." Reynolds slowly lowered himself into his chair as the meaning of those words settled over him. His eyes instinctively moved toward the interview room at the end of the hallway. "Colonel," he said carefully, "could you describe the general?" Brooks answered immediately. "African-American male, approximately 6 feet 3 inches tall, silver hair, navy jacket, carrying a weathered brown leather folder containing official Army documents and a military commendation." Reynolds felt the color drain from his face. Every detail matched the gentleman quietly waiting behind the closed door. For several seconds he could not find the right words. Finally he spoke. "Colonel, I believe Lieutenant General Ellison is currently inside our station." Silence filled the line before Brooks answered in a noticeably firmer voice. "Is he safe?" Reynolds replied at once. "Yes, sir. He has been cooperative the entire time." Brooks took a slow breath. "Please do not delay any longer. Major General Rebecca Lawson is already preparing to travel if necessary. We simply need General Ellison released immediately so he can continue his official responsibilities." Reynolds closed his eyes for a brief moment before quietly replying, "Understood." As the call ended, he remained seated without moving, staring toward the hallway as though the building around him had suddenly become unfamiliar. Across the bullpen, dispatchers noticed the unusual expression on their supervisor's face. Officers who had been completing reports gradually stopped typing. Reynolds stood and called out, "Officer Callahan. Officer Collins. My office." Now, Ryan entered first, still believing the situation was simply another prolonged investigation. Derek followed close behind, sensing from the sergeant's expression that something significant had changed. Reynolds closed the office door. "Tell me everything from the beginning," he said. Ryan carefully explained the stop, the restricted records, the protected documents, and his decision to bring Marcus to the station for additional verification. Reynolds listened without interruption. When Ryan finished, the sergeant asked one quiet question. "Did he ever refuse to cooperate?" Ryan shook his head. "No, sir." "Did he threaten anyone?" "No, sir." "Did he provide false identification?" "No, sir." Derek answered before Ryan could continue. "Everything he told us has been consistent from the very beginning." Reynolds rested both hands on his desk. "The man sitting in our interview room is Lieutenant General Marcus Ellison. The Pentagon has been searching for him because he was supposed to lead a classified national defense briefing this morning." Neither officer spoke. Ryan stared at the sergeant as though he had misheard every word. Derek slowly looked toward the office window facing the hallway. The realization arrived all at once. The calm confidence, the restricted records, the protected documents, the extraordinary patience. Every unanswered question suddenly became a complete answer. Ryan quietly whispered, "General Ellison?" Reynolds nodded once. "A few minutes ago, I was speaking directly with the Department of Defense. They are not asking whether he committed an offense. They are asking why one of the highest-ranking officers in the United States Army has not arrived for an assignment that affects military operations across the country. An almost overwhelming silence settled over the office. Outside, ordinary station activity continued for another few moments because no one else yet understood what had happened. Marcus remained seated in the interview room exactly as he had been since arriving, hands folded calmly on the table, never raising his voice, never demanding special treatment, never mentioning his rank even once. He had trusted that the truth would eventually arrive on its own, and at that very moment, it had finally walked through the front door. Sergeant Thomas Reynolds opened the interview room door more slowly than he had intended, suddenly aware that every ordinary gesture carried extraordinary weight. Marcus Ellison looked up from the table with the same calm expression he had worn since arriving at the station. There was no anger in his eyes, no impatience in his posture, only quiet attentiveness. Reynolds stepped inside and closed the door behind him. "General Ellison," he said respectfully, "I owe you an apology." Marcus offered a gentle smile. "Sergeant, I appreciate your honesty." Reynolds took a steady breath before continuing. "The Department of Defense has confirmed your identity. We are preparing to release you immediately." Marcus nodded once. "Thank you. My greatest concern has always been Sergeant William Harper. He has been waiting for a ceremony that should have taken place many years ago." Reynolds lowered his eyes for a brief moment. Even now, after everything that had happened, Marcus spoke first about another veteran instead of himself. That quiet act of selflessness struck him more deeply than any official title ever could. Outside the interview room, word spread through the station with remarkable speed. Officers who had never met Marcus before quietly stopped what they were doing. Dispatchers looked toward the hallway. Detectives emerged from their offices. Ryan Callahan remained standing exactly where Reynolds had left him, trying to reconcile the confident assumptions he had carried all morning with the reality now standing only a few yards away. Derek Collins slowly approached him. "He told us the truth from the very beginning," Derek said quietly. Ryan did not answer because there was nothing left to defend. Every question he believed had justified his actions had already been answered long before the first radio call was ever made. Moments later, the front entrance opened again. Several senior military officers entered the station wearing service uniforms marked with unmistakable insignia. Their movements were calm, professional, and deliberate. At their head was Major General Rebecca Lawson. The conversations throughout the building faded into complete silence as she walked directly towards Sergeant Reynolds. "Where is General Ellison?" she asked. Reynolds respectfully gestured toward the interview room. "He is safe, General." Lawson nodded appreciatively before opening the door herself. The moment she saw Marcus, her posture immediately reflected the respect earned through decades of honorable service. "Sir," she said warmly, "we have been looking everywhere for you." Marcus stood and smiled with familiar kindness. "I am sorry for the unexpected delay, Rebecca." She shook her head gently. "The briefing can wait. We were far more concerned about your safety." Marcus picked up the weathered leather folder, carefully confirming that Sergeant William Harper's commendation remained exactly where it belonged. "Then we still have time to keep one important promise," he said. Lawson looked at the folder and immediately understood. "The ceremony." Marcus nodded. "A soldier has already waited long enough." As they stepped into the hallway together, every conversation inside the station came to a complete stop. Officers instinctively stood straighter. Civilian employees quietly moved aside. The atmosphere no longer resembled an ordinary police station on an ordinary Thursday morning. It had become a place where everyone suddenly understood that genuine leadership often arrives without announcing itself. Major General Lawson paused in the center of the hallway before speaking in a clear, composed voice. "Attention!" The single word echoed across the building. Uniformed military personnel immediately came to attention. A heartbeat later, police officers recognized the significance of the moment and respectfully followed their lead. The station became completely still. Lawson then faced Marcus Ellison. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, "you are in the presence of Lieutenant General Marcus Ellison, whose lifetime of service has honored this nation, its soldiers, and its values." Without another instruction, hands rose in respectful salute across the hallway. Ryan Callahan felt the weight of his own raised hand more heavily than anyone else. Only a short time earlier, He had believed authority belonged solely to the uniform he wore. Now he understood that true authority could never be measured by a badge alone. It was measured by integrity, humility, and decades of service that required no introduction. Marcus returned the salute with quiet dignity, not as a gesture of personal triumph, but as a sign of respect for every honorable person in the room. There was no satisfaction in proving anyone wrong. There was only gratitude that the truth had finally found its proper place, and with that truth came a silence far more powerful than any argument ever could have been. Marcus Ellison walked out of the station beside Major General Rebecca Lawson without a trace of resentment on his face. The hallway remained silent as every officer slowly lowered a respectful salute. For several long seconds no one moved. The weight of what had happened settled over the building more completely than any spoken reprimand ever could. Ryan Callahan finally stepped forward, his confidence replaced by quiet reflection. He removed his patrol cap and held it respectfully at his side. "General Ellison," he said, "I owe you more than an apology. I allowed assumptions to speak louder than facts, and I failed to show you the respect that every person deserves before their story is known." Marcus looked at him with the same calm kindness that had carried him through the entire morning. "Officer Callahan," he replied, "every profession carries great responsibility. Mine required difficult decisions. Yours does as well. The measure of character is not whether mistakes are possible. It is whether we have the courage to learn from them." Ryan lowered his eyes. "I will remember that for the rest of my career." Marcus gave a slight nod. Then today was not wasted. Those simple words surprised everyone standing nearby. No demand for punishment. No public humiliation. No desire for revenge. Only a quiet invitation to become better than the day before. Sergeant Thomas Reynolds stepped forward next. "General, on behalf of this department, I sincerely apologize for the delay and for the misunderstanding." Marcus shook the sergeant's hand warmly. "Thank you, Sergeant. I appreciate your professionalism once the full picture became clear." He then lifted the weathered leather folder and smiled gently. "Now, if everyone will excuse me, there is a soldier who has already waited far too many years." Within minutes, a military vehicle carried Marcus and Major General Lawson to the Arlington Veterans Community Center. The volunteers waiting near the entrance looked toward the arriving vehicle with visible relief. Inside the gathering hall, Sergeant William Harper remained seated in the front row, still wearing the same carefully pressed jacket and the same hopeful smile. When Marcus entered the room, every veteran present rose to welcome him. Marcus walked directly to William before saying anything else. "Sergeant Harper," he said warmly, "thank you for your patience. I am deeply sorry for keeping you waiting." William smiled with gentle understanding. "General, you came. That is all that matters." Marcus carefully opened the presentation case and removed the long overdue military commendation. The room became completely silent as he read the official citation honoring William's faithful service to his country many decades earlier. When the medal was finally placed into the veteran's hands, tears filled more than one pair of eyes throughout the audience. The applause that followed was heartfelt, unhurried, and filled with genuine gratitude. Marcus stood beside William for photographs, listened to old stories from fellow veterans, and greeted every family member who had gathered for the occasion. Although the classified briefing at the Pentagon would begin later than planned, no one there questioned the delay after learning why it had occurred. Some responsibilities could be rescheduled. Honoring a forgotten promise deserved its proper moment. Several weeks later, the Arlington Police Department introduced additional training focused on impartial decision-making, respectful communication, and careful verification before drawing conclusions. Ryan Callahan volunteered to help develop those discussions, openly sharing the lesson he had learned that morning. He never attempted to excuse his actions. Instead, he encouraged younger officers to remember that dignity should always be offered before identity is fully understood. Marcus Ellison never spoke publicly about what had happened inside the station. When reporters later asked about the incident, he simply smiled and said, "The best victories are the ones that leave everyone wiser." Those who heard his answer expected a dramatic story about rank and authority. Instead, they received a lesson about humility, patience, and respect. Because in the end, the most powerful uniform in the room was never the one decorated with stars or protected by a badge. It was the invisible character carried by the person wearing it. And that is why real honor never demands recognition. It quietly earns it, one choice at a time.